Hello everyone, my name is Roel Deus, and in today's session I'm going to give you an overview of the newly rolled out eBA workflow value calculator. So the goal of this calculator basically is to provide you, the business partner, with a sales enablement tool. In essence, an ability to give your prospective customers an easy way to actually quantify the value of eBA. Specifically, really the benefits of moving from a manual forms-based process to an eBA electronic workflow-powered process. So with this tool, you will be able now to actually quantify the time saved and translate the saved time into actual dollars. And more importantly, really give your prospect an understanding of what the payback period will be of investing in eBA workflow. An added benefit really is the fact that we've built this value calculator on top of the eBA platform. So while you're doing this value calculation with your prospect, you're actually in essence demoing a use case or an application of the eBA platform. So let's get started. First of all, I'm going to show you where you can find the value calculator. So you have to go to your partner portal. Obviously, for everyone, your startup screen may look differently, and go to the application section. In the application section, you will see the eBA value calculator tool, and there's two components to it. There's a calculate, which is what you would most commonly use to build your reports, or there's a parameters forms, and the parameter form just gives you a brief overview of some of the parameters that we've defined. As you can see here, we've defined 7 different tasks, if you will, that could be applicable to a paper or manual-based process. What's important to note here is the fact that you see this column called eBA saving percentages, right? So if you think about the task of, for example, routing, in an electronic workflow process, that's done automatically for you. So there's 100% time savings in this specific case. Or let's say when you think about rekeying of data, there's really 100% time saving, because with the eBA platform, you can actually do this in essence automatically without having to manually retype information from a form into an ERP. To keep things simple, we've defined 5 roles, or let's say seniority levels within typical organizations, ranging from a lower level admin type of position to an executive CFO, CEO type of position. So what does this all mean? Let's just go to the calculation side here, and let's just start a sample calculation. And for practical purposes, I'm going to take an example, a hypothetical example of a mid-size manufacturer in the Midwest. They have 5 plants or factories, and they are looking to understand how much time and money they can save if they would move their current manual invoice approval process to a more electronic one. So let's assume in this case each plant receives on average 500 invoices on a monthly basis. That basically comes down to 6,000 invoices yearly, and these are paper-based invoices, right? They come in as paper, and they are then further routed for manual approvals and then entered into the ERP system. So 6,000 invoices yearly per plant times 5 plants comes down to 30,000 invoices yearly. So let's start by filling out the general info section, which would be providing your contact details, and this is basically where ultimately the value savings report will be sent to. So it can be you, the business partner, or it can be actually directly your prospect. So in this case, I'm going to fill out my contact details here, and I'm going to name this process invoice approval process manufacturer. There we go. Second, Second section that you're going to be filling out here are some workflow variables. So we already defined that there's going to be about 30,000 paper-based invoices that are being processed by this company on a yearly basis. Let's assume, this company has about 10 people in their accounting group, but in general they have 125 people which would be classified as white-collar workers, and that would have some type of involvement in this approval process, either by virtue of them being actual purchase requester or by virtue of them needing to provide some sort of a review and approval on an invoice. So let's put in here 125. And this number is going to be important because we actually base the estimate of the investment on this number. So what you will see ultimately in the report is not just a time and dollar savings, but an actual payback period, which is based upon an investment based upon 125 user licenses. So we're actually using the eBA workflow starter package to input a license price, and then in addition to that, we're also providing an average implementation estimate for this process, so that we can actually provide a payback period calculation. But more on that a little later. So now the next step in this process is for us to sit down with this customer and more or less ballpark define what their fully loaded employee costs are based upon these 5 levels that I've shown you before. So let's do this very quickly. We're in the Midwest. Let's say an admin level person fully loaded cost would be $40,000. For a professional level person, and this is in essence, a non-managerial role within an organization, could be a buyer, could be a sales executive, could be, a finance specialist. Let's assume that their fully loaded yearly costs are $75,000. Then we're going to add the manager level fully loaded cost. Let's assume that that would be $95,000. And now we're going to add the director level fully loaded cost. Let's assume that would be a ballpark figure of $150,000. And then finally, let's add a ballpark figure fully loaded cost for an executive. Let's be conservative and let's say that's going to be, put in the right role here, $250,000. There we go. So we've defined the employee costs, of this prospective mid-sized manufacturer. Now, in the next section, we're actually going to ask that prospect to provide a detailed accounting of how long it takes for each step in the process to be completed based upon these 7 tasks that we've defined in the parameter form. So let's get started with that. Let's add the first task. First task being the form start. So this is basically the act of receiving this incoming invoice, potentially adding a cover sheet with some sections where purchase requester and approvers can actually put their signature. So basically getting the form ready to be sent to the next step in the process. So let's assume the fastest way we can do this would be within 1 minute and the slowest way would be in 3 minutes. And the system will actually automatically calculate the average time spent on each task, as you can see here. Second task to define time on is the task of doing data validation. So think about this in the context of an invoice. You're looking at this paper invoice and you're entering into your ERP system just to double check that the PO number is a correct one, actually matching a active PO in your ERP. You're, for example, checking the vendor name, the total price, details like that. So let's say this takes a fast accounts payable clerk 2 minutes, a slow one 4 minutes, so the average would be 3 minutes. Now let's look at task number 3. Task number 3 is the routing. So the routing is basically, could be the whole process of, a mail clerk picking up the invoice, bringing it to the person that is the purchase requester, or maybe you're actually walking it over to somebody's desk. So let's say, at a minimum, it's taking you 1 minute, maximum 2 minutes. Let's be very conservative here. Now let's look at task number 4, which is notifications. So this is basically the act of, let's say, notifying people that are involved in the process that, for example, the process has been completed. This may not necessarily be something very common in this account's invoice approval process, but let's say if you're doing a request for PTO, obviously at the end of that request, you want to let every involved party, like the employee, the manager, the HR person, know that let's say the PTO request has been approved. So if we were to use this, let's say notifications takes on average 1 minute, maximum 2 minutes. Let's look at task number 5, which is approve, reject, review. So basically the act of approving or rejecting, a form. So let's say, again, 1 minute, maximum 3 minutes, average 2 minutes. Task number 6 will be the rekeying of data, and this is obviously a big one in the context of this process, right? So it may take, really fast accounts payable specialist, let's say 2 minutes, to enter or rekey an invoice into their ERP system. And depending on, the speed of that person or maybe the size of that invoice, it could actually take 8 minutes, let's say. So an average is going to be taking 5 minutes. Now, I think this is going to be the last task that we're defining. Let's define the task of actually saving and storing an invoice. So once the process has been completed, the invoice needs to be saved either in a physical filing cabinet, or it has to be maybe scanned and then uploaded to a file folder. So let's say it's going to take somebody as fast as 2 minutes to do the saving and storing procedure, but it could actually take much longer depending on where your filing cabinet is or whether you're actually scanning the invoice, etc., etc. So let's say it's going to take 9 minutes maximum to do that task. So now that we've defined employee costs as well as time spent on tasks, let's actually build a process. So in this case, we're going to really keep the process simple. The invoice comes into the organization as a paper-based invoice. It's handled by the accounting group and is in essence then routed. First of all, it's the accounting group looks and sees who's the purchase requester, routes that invoice to the purchase requester who needs to review and approve it, and then there's a final step of approval by, let's say, an executive level to final approve the invoice and allow it to be processed for payment in the ERP. That's the process that we're going to build here. So let's start. So the first task here is the form start, which is, assume let's have that done by the accounts payable clerk. We're going to enter that task. Hit OK. Now the accounts payable clerk is going to route the invoice to the purchase requester. So there's going to be a task of routing. In this case, let's assume the purchase requester is a manager within the sales department. Maybe he or she ordered a couple of iPads for their staff. So they're going to now review or approve this invoice. And then once they've done that, they actually need to route it to a final level of approval. In this case, we are assuming that's going to be the CFO who needs to do a final approval before the invoice can actually be paid. So the manager is actually the executive now is going to do a review and approval process. So let's add that task. And then They have to route it back to the accounting group because the invoice now has to be entered into the ERP system for approvals, for payment. There we go. So approve routing. Yep. So now the accounting group gets the invoice back. Let's say in this case it's handled by an accounting specialist. And that accounting specialist is going to be rekeying this invoice into the ERP system. So this is a rekeying of data. And once they're done with that, they're going to route it to, an accounts payable clerk. And the accounts payable clerk is going to save this invoice, let's assume in this case in a physical filing cabinet. And with that last action or task, we basically have completed the process steps involved in this invoice approval process. Now, mind you, depending on what kind of scenario you are discussing with your prospect, obviously this process would look very differently. We're taking the example here of a workflow process in finance, but it could be a sales order form process. It could be, as mentioned, a PTO request, or it may be even something along the lines of, an HR onboarding process where many different forms need to be filled out by the prospective employee. So we're done with this one. We hit OK, and now we are going to hit calculate. And what's going to happen on the background now is eBA is going to be calculating the actual time saved, the dollars saved, as well as the payback period of this specific process based upon a license investment of 125 users in eBA Workflow Starter Package. And in addition to that license investment, we've also built into the investment the average cost of an implementation process. And this is basically based upon our best practices and our knowledge of building eBA processes. On average, a simple process to build this on the eBA platform costs about 0.35 times the actual license investment. So that's the number that we will be using for calculation purposes. So the person filling out this value calculator will be receiving an email directly from the eBA system with the actual report. And sometimes this may take a few minutes, and sometimes it may actually not hit your inbox. It may hit your junk mail. So let's have a look and see if the report has been received. Let's see, this is not the one. Let's look at my junk mail folder. And I believe these are the two reports that are pertinent to this specific calculation. So let's look at the actual value report. This is what you would be receiving. Let's open the form. So this basically gives a two-page overview and analysis of the value of eBA. It provides the general info, the workflow variables, 30,000 paper-based invoices on a yearly basis, 125 people within the organization involved in this process. So let's look at some of the details here. So as you can see, we've automatically calculated the projected investment to build this specific process in eBA, which is about $42,000. The time savings are quite interesting here. So if this process is done in the fastest possible way, by putting it onto eBA, you can save 9 minutes out of your day on each manual paper-based invoice. Maximum you can save 29 minutes. So on average, you're saving nearly 20 minutes of your time by making this process electronic through eBA. So that translates, as you can see, on average in an $11 saving per paper-based invoice, which is massive, right? $7 at a minimum, $17 at a maximum. And that translates on a yearly basis to a savings of $330,000. That's very, very, that's very substantial. And if we then, set that off against the actual eBA investment, what you're seeing here is that at a maximum, so in the worst case scenario, this eBA investment will pay itself back after just a quarter of a year, after just 3 months. It can be as fast as 0.1 years, and on average, it's going to take about 0.15 years for this investment to pay itself back. So these are some really concrete numbers that you can share with your prospect to give them an understanding as to how, using a workflow platform like eBA to automate, manual paper-based processes can actually save you a lot of time and a lot of money in a relatively short amount of time. And that's really the goal of this value calculator sales enablement tool. So I hope this will be useful to you, the partner. We hope also that you will be sharing with us any feedbacks or suggestions on further to improve this calculator tool. We look forward to lots of value calculation reports here. Thank you very much for your time and attention. And this was Roel Deus providing you an overview of the eBA workflow value calculator tool. Thanks.